Hello Simmers and welcome back to Corfu with the Saab 340A, the cargo version of that airplane for this flight. And what I'm going to do today is focus a bit more on the autopilot system of this airplane, because a couple of weeks ago Mr. Jan Kin asked me if I could do a tutorial specific on the autopilot for this airplane. Well, it took a while for me to make it. It was 3 weeks ago since he requested it, so I'm sorry for the long wait. But well, I'm not too familiar with this airplane myself, so I had to do a little bit of study. Takes, of course, time. Didn't have much time. I then made a video. I wasn't happy about that one, so I decided not to upload that one, but reshoot. And well, all in all, we are now 3 weeks onwards, and I hope that this will be the tutorial that I will finally be able to upload. So the autopilot system for the Saab. Well, what I'm going to do in the first part basically is I'll run you through the basics, the positions in the flight deck that you need, the switches, the manipulators, what each switch does, etc. And then I'm planning to do a flight. I won't include the full flight in the video, only the parts where I actually do something to navigate with the autopilot. And what we will do for the flight today is fly from Corfu in Western Greece, fly the Yankee November 1 Bravo departure to Ioannina, and then onwards VOR to Larissa, and then from Larissa VOR to Skopelos VOR. And from Skopelos we will make a visual approach into runway 02 in Skiathos in eastern Greece. And Skiathos is particularly nice since I have also a couple of months ago already I bought the Skiathos scenery from x-aviation.com, which is a beautiful scenery package for what is basically known as the European Princess Juliana Airport, because Skiathos is a very small island with a well, not too big airport, but the runway of that airport, it's quite funny to demonstrate that. Let me just see where the hell it is. So Skiathos, here we are. If you look at satellite imagery, this is the airport, with this being a beach, end of the runway, and another beach. So especially this part is very popular by spotters to watch the airplane come in very low over the beach. So that is what's in store for us today. Let's begin, like I said, with a basic explanation of the different knobs, switches, whatever you need in the flight deck to operate the autopilot. The main autopilot station is positioned here on the pedestal near the radio. So let me just go to a view where we have a better field of view on that. And the main switches are in here, this little panel. In here you have the switch for the yaw damper and a switch for the autopilot. And why is it important to know that there are two different systems? You can use the yaw damper without the autopilot, but you cannot use the autopilot without the yaw damper. So in order to use the autopilot in this airplane, you have to switch both the yaw damper and the autopilot switch to the engaged position. Now, if you only click the yaw damper switch 1, it will be engaged and that's it. However, if you press the autopilot switch once, as you can see, it will jump up and straight back. What you have to do to engage the autopilot is click and hold for 1 second the switch. And this has to do with the fact that as soon as you engage the autopilot system will first run a test. And if that test is completed successfully, it will engage the autopilot. If the test is completed unsuccessfully, it will disengage the autopilot. And if you let go of the switch before the test has finished, it will say that the test was unsuccessful and therefore disengage the autopilot. So what you have to do is click, hold it for 1 second, and then it will stay in position. Now, to disengage, as you can see, you just press it here again, and then you hear this alarm sounding. To silence that alarm, you have to press the red button on the yoke. And then it will just run once, and then it remains off. So you can engage and disengage in here, but to silence the alarm, you have to press the autopilot disconnect button on the yoke. Of course, when you have the autopilot engaged, you can also disconnect it with that one and then press it again to silence the alarm. So that's quite important to know. Well, as you can see, another thing in the autopilot main panel is this weird looking knob. And this knob gives you the ability to manipulate the autopilot in two different dimensions. If you use it like this, you can rotate it and you can set your vertical speed, so it moves down if you move it in that way, or you can move up if you move it in that way. And when you do so, you will see the vertical speed being displayed in here on the artificial horizon, on the primary flight display. So now you can see it's 300 feet per minute up, and when I go further up and I move this a bit further, then there is a slight delay usually, at least when you are in the air. I'm not really sure whether this works when you are still on the ground with the engines off. Doesn't look like it. But anyway, with this knob you can manipulate the vertical speed setting in here. Another quite important button in the whole autopiloting of this airplane is the vertical sync button here. This will work in certain modes of the airplane, and I will get to that, the different modes, in a couple of minutes. But when you press this one, as you can see, it goes back to 0. And why is that? Because we right now have a vertical speed of 0. Vertical sync means that the air data that is in the air data, the reference systems for the autopilot at that very moment, is basically being copied to the autopilot, and the autopilot will just follow in whatever position the airplane is. So for instance, if you've just taken off and you're climbing out 1000 feet per minute, in this mode, if you press vertical sync, you will get 1000 feet per minute in here as well. So that's the objective of the vertical sync knob. You can just basically copy paste all the data in the air reference systems to the autopilot, and the autopilot will keep doing what the airplane is doing when you press that button. So now we have had the engage disengagement. We know, and then the other thing that you can do with this knob is you can move the airplane from left to right. If you get this cursor, the two banded arrows, by clicking and moving it left or right, you can then manipulate your heading bug. As you can see, the heading bug up here, it starts to move when you hold it like that. And this will of course manipulate the heading bug on your nav display down there. Now that heading bug, you can do that with this one, but you can also just immediately go with this one to put any setting that you like in there. I usually use this one. I don't really like this knob, but with this you also get it. And a third way of manipulating the heading bug is pressing the heading slave, and as soon as you press that button, the heading bug will be set to the current heading of the airplane. So if I press it right now, it will move right to the top here. So let's do that in 3, 2, 1, blink of an eye, and it's there. It's instantly. So that's basically the three ways of moving the heading bug around the navigation display. The other part of the autopilot system is basically the flight director modes. In here you have these magenta things. That's the flight director. And the flight director can follow 7 modes in this airplane. It's the heading mode, the nav mode, the vertical speed, indicated airspeed, climb, altitude hold, and approach mode. What is important to realize is that, like I said, we will fly from A to B. That's our lateral navigation from point A to point B. And we also have to fly to a certain altitude. We'll be taking off, climbing until we reach 25,000 feet. That will be the cruise altitude for today. And once we are somewhere near Larissa, we will start to descend again from 25,000 feet downwards to till we are at 4,000 feet over Skopelos, and then 2,000 feet over here, and then we'll just go in there. And that whole process from the ground, climbing up to cruise altitude, blah blah blah, and then back down to the ground again, that is called vertical navigation. Now, why is that important? From these modes in the flight director system, 2 are lateral navigation modes. So basically getting your airplane from point A to point B, and that's both the heading and the nav modes. Then you have a couple of vertical modes. That's vertical speed, indicated airspeed, climb, and altitude hold. And there's a combined mode, and that's the approach mode, which is down there. Now, if you look up in the manual, because everything that I'm telling right now I got from the manual, page 192 downwards, gets a full explanation of the autopilot and the flight director systems. There are a couple of other modes. I'm not going into them right now. There's, for instance, the go-around mode. That's also a combined mode. You have pitch, vertical, well, you name it. Just read that through. This is just the basics of the autopilot system. So what does each of these modes do? Let's just run through them. The heading mode. Well, as the name suggests, it will have the autopilot follow the heading, and that's the heading on which the heading bug is set. So for instance, if we are flying right now 290 approximately, and I move the heading knob to the right, for instance, to 330. With the autopilot engaged in heading mode, you will then see that the airplane start to make a right-hand turn. You can see it in the flight director here already. It wants the airplane to go to the right until it is at 330, and then it will come down level again. It will level the wings and maintain straight and level flight. And with heading slave, you see that it wants us at level flight. So that's the heading mode. Just follow the bug wherever you want. And of course you want to be in this mode, the heading mode, when you are being factored by air traffic control or you don't have navigation points where you want to go. The second lateral mode is the nav mode, and basically the nav mode has 2 sub-modes, and you can switch between those with the select button. It's not really 2 sub-modes, but it has 2 sources for the navigation. Because when you are in navigation mode with this airplane, as it is right now, it will follow the VOR beacon that is set in your nav radio and the course that you have selected. So for instance, after takeoff we first fly to Kerkira VOR, that is on 114.70. And according to my flight plan, I have to fly on a course of 139. So I can move up here, dial in here 114. What was it? Decimal 7? Yeah, 1147. And then move it as an active one by just moving this switch up, and then you get this lighted frequency 114.7. And with this one being in VOR mode, it will recognize that frequency. And I want to fly to that VOR, like I said, on a course of 139. Now in here, in the lower left corner, you can see the current course for that nav radio, because there are two nav radios, a left and right. And on the left system, I now have a course of 114. I want that to be 139. So with this knob, I can adjust the course for the left radio, and with this one I can do the same thing for the right radio. So let me just dial that up, 139. And that's now set. So VOR1 is tuned and on course, but I'm not really satisfied with the fact that I don't get 1147. Yeah. Okay, it's funny that it doesn't recognize it yet. But anyway, that's what you do with this one. Then another important thing is you can see this magenta arrow in here, and that's basically pointing to an NDB. If the NDB, where you have set the frequency for, is in the area. As long as it isn't there, you can hide it by pressing the BRO, Bravo, or bearing, sorry, the bearing knob in here. You can display or hide that NDB indicator. With the second course, you can display or hide the course indicator for the right VOR or the right nav radio. So what we want to do after we passed Kerkira, we want to fly to what is called Ioannina, which is on 108.6. So if I dial in 108.6 in the right nav radio and set it to the active mode, you can immediately see that right now I have that one alive. It's identified and it has a distance. And I have to fly from Kerkira to Ioannina on a course of 062. So I can manipulate the course for the right radio with this knob, and I just dial it until above here it says 062. There we are. Now another important thing in this panel is of course the altitude select thing. Well, you know this one, this is in every Boeing, Airbus, whatsoever. When you are familiar with autopilots in modern jetliners, this won't be a surprise to you. You can just dial in the altitude where you want to go in here, and the airplane will not exceed climbing above that altitude. And there are two knobs in here, nav left and nav right, nav source left, nav source right. So basically you can, right now with nav source left, the left navigation radio is the active source for the autopilot's navigation mode. But like I said, there are two sources, basically three, because actually the left nav radio is one source, the right nav radio is another source, but the third source is the GPS, which is down there. Now I already dialed in the flight plan that we are going to follow into the GPS. And if I want the airplane to follow that flight plan, then I have to switch my nav source from VOR until it says LRN1. When you have this one, LRN1, in the lower left corner of the nav display, it means that the autopilot for lateral navigation has as its source selected the GPS. Now this is of course quite handy when you are flying, for instance, standard instrument departures from major airports or standard arrival routes that uses navigational fixes. Because a fix is just a set of coordinates with a name attached to it, but it is not a physical beacon on the ground, whereas a VOR is a physical radio beacon on the ground. If I move to Kerkira at this specific position, I will on the ground see a radio antenna that is sending out the signal that my airplane uses to fly to there. However, if I, for instance, would go to Parax, which is down there, I don't know what's down there, but I can tell you it's not a nav radio. There's not a radio station broadcasting a signal. This is just the location that you can see, the north 39 degrees 33, east 20 degrees 24. Yeah, whatever is there doesn't really matter, but in the computer it says that it's a point called Parax intersection. So if you have a flight plan where you use like go to Parax, Tilgi, and then to Picos, well, then you need to use your GPS, because you cannot do that with radio navigation. There's no radio frequency broadcasted from here. You cannot set a basic course to that. So anyway, back to basics. Either the left or right nav radio or the GPS can be used as a source for the nav mode in the airplane. Now, as you can see, the basic mode is heading and vertical speed. Vertical speed, like I said, you can manipulate that with this knob. I'm not too fond of that because well, in the air I experience a delay between my input here and the setting here, and it doesn't go very smooth either. So it's hard to set it at the desired vertical speed. What I usually do when I use vertical speed mode is just manually with the yoke and power levers get the rate of climb that I like, or the rate of descent for all that matters, and then press the third sync button. That's the most easiest way and most precise way of setting the vertical speed that the autopilot has to fly. Another mode is the indicated airspeed mode. And well, of course, this is the airspeed indicator, and you have a bug in there that you can set. And right now it's set to about 125 knots, because that will be the speed at which we will be climbing out. That's the V2 basically. And when I adjust my power levers and I throttle up and we run down the runway and then we start climbing, if I have my power levers advanced far enough, even while climbing, the airplane can still accelerate. So the airplane will accelerate and the needle will walk up the dial until it reaches the bug that I have set. As soon as it reached the bug, the airplane will use the energy that is generated by the engines not for accelerating anymore, but it will basically translate that into climb energy. The engines, they deliver enough energy to accelerate way beyond the bug that I have set. They can go to, for instance, 250 knots if I were to fly straight and level. I don't want that. I want to be at 125 knots, and all the extra power that the engines generate, I want to use that to climb to the altitude that is set in my altitude indicator in here. And that's what the indicated airspeed mode does. I can just set it wherever I like. The airplane will fly that speed, and the surplus of energy that the engines generate that is not needed for accelerating the airplane will be used to climb. So you don't set a fixed vertical speed, it will just adjust the vertical speed to the amount of power that is available. Or when I'm flying at my cruise altitude and I want to start my descent, I can just set my indicated airspeed mode, set the debug somewhere, close the power levers. When I close the power levers, the engines don't generate any energy, at least not enough to maintain speed. So the airplane, as a result of the drag and the wind, you name it, will start to decelerate until the speed indicator reaches the bug again. As soon as the speed indicator reaches the bug, the airplane has to hold that speed. It cannot do that in straight and level flight because the power levers are closed. So there's only one way for the airplane to gain speed, and that is by descending, because as soon as the plane starts dropping down, the speed will move up. So it's a very easy way to start your descent. What is very important to realize with this airplane is that the power management of the engines has to be done manual throughout the flight, because there is no auto throttle system in this airplane. For instance, if you have a Boeing or an Airbus, you just set your auto throttle arm or engaged. You press some things and the airplane will move the power levers by itself. This airplane cannot do that. You have to do your engine power management manual. And that's very important, of course, because suppose that we're flying at 25,000 feet and we want to descend to, well, like I said, 4,000 feet when we reach Skiathos. As soon as the airplane reaches 4,000 feet, it will level off at that altitude. If I do not engage or increase the engine power, the engines won't generate enough power to maintain speed. But the airplane has to stay at altitude and it will do that. So as a result, the speed will drop and it will drop and it will drop further until it drops below stall speed. You get into a stall and you have to, well, recover from that, and if you are not paying attention, you might even crash because of that. So very important, always be aware of the fact that you have to do all the engine power management manually. You cannot automate that in this airplane, so you always have to be on top of the airplane when you are flying. Another mode is the climb mode, and the climb mode is actually very similar to the indicated airspeed mode. Now let me keep this view because this is quite important. If you press climb mode once, and you have to watch the upper right corner, if I press it once like now, it will say 182H climb. Now what does that mean? It's the H stands for high or high speed. 182 is 182 knots. You can see that the speed bug is now moved to 182 knots. So the airplane will climb at 182 knots if you press climb once. If you press it twice, you can see that the speed will be dropping. It's now 161 medium speed climb. Press it again, the third mode, 141 knots low speed climb. So there are 3 set modes, and the speeds, they are derived from all the settings in the reference data for the flight control computer. So they may vary in different environments, different loads of the airplane, well, you name it. But this is derived by the computer, this speed. And of course, like I said, if you set your power levers full forward, you have a lot of energy. It doesn't take the airplane much to stay at 141 knots, so it will climb faster. And if you set it at high speed 182, it will climb, well, slower. But that's the climb mode. So 3 modes: high, medium, low. And you select them by repressing this button. Once high, then again medium, then low. Press it again, back to high. And the final mode, well, alt select. Or altitude hold, I must say, I'm sorry. Altitude hold is basically like I have taken off. I am climbing towards 7,000 feet. Let's say I pass 3,000 feet. When I press alt hold, the airplane will level off and keep flying the altitude that I passed when I pressed alt hold. That's it. And the final mode, the combined mode, is the approach mode. Well, I assume everyone who is trying to fly this airplane has flown well, more advanced airliners before, at least knows what an L.E.S is. If you have selected an L.E.S frequency and set the correct L.E.S course, you can use the approach mode for the airplane to automatically fly the localizer and glide slope of that particular approach. With a side note that you still have to do your engine power management yourself. It cannot do that. But that's why this is called a combined mode, because it will do it will fly the localizer, and the localizer is of course lateral navigation, and it will fly the glide slope, which is vertical navigation. And that's basically it. That's the basic systems for the autopilot in the Saab 340. And that also concludes the first part of this tutorial. So what I will do now is start up the engines, taxi to the runway. I'll be back with you guys as soon as we are ready for takeoff. Then I will take off the airplane and we will start setting autopilot modes. And what we are going to do, that's quite important to explain to you. We have a standard instrument departure, the Yankee November November 1 Bravo 2 Yankee November November. So we'll take off, climb out and go to there. And for this first leg of our flight, we will use the nav mode with the GPS selected as navigation source. When we reach Ioannina, we will then switch from GPS to VOR mode, so I can show you how the VOR to VOR navigation works by flying in that mode from Ioannina to Larissa and from Larissa to Skopelos. And from Skopelos we will be using the heading mode to fly our approach into runway 2. So basically I have then demonstrated all the lateral modes that are available in the airplane. We'll be using the climb first to get to cruise altitude, and we will be using the indicated airspeed mode for the descent. I don't think I will be doing much with the vertical speed mode. I hardly ever use that actually, but you can use that, for instance, when you have longer flights to do flight level changes. You can, for instance, climb or descend 2000 feet with 500 feet per minute. You can use vertical speed mode for that. But other than that, I never use it, and this is such a short flight that we won't be using that one, I think. But I think that with that flight, I can give you a good impression of the different modes of the autopilot and the different phases of flight in which you use them. So I will now cut the video here, and I'll be back with you guys as soon as I am ready for takeoff. So see you in a bit. So hello and welcome back.
On runway,
as you can see, we are now on the runway 17. Lining up and ready to go. So let's press the heading slave mode and set the condition levers to max. I already ran the checklist, that's completed. Now what I want to do is fly the use the GPS for the nav source. So I set this one to nav mode. GPS is selected, left LRN1 is checked, and I want to climb at a high speed climb of 182 knots. So that's now selected. So when I press the autopilot, when I engage it, it will follow the it will set a climb to 181 and then follow the GPS for the navigation. Now what I can also do is set it to IAS first for the V2, which is actually a safer option since I have flaps selected.
On runway 17.
So I don't want the airplane accelerating to 180 instantly, because I need time to retract the flaps before I accelerate beyond the maximum flap extend speed. But anyway, brakes are released. Takeoff inhibit is pushed. So let's increase the power levers. Here we go to Skiathos. Airspeed active. $80 knots. V1. Rotates. Positive rate of climb. Gear up. Flaps up. And As you can see, we are now climbing out. So let's engage the autopilot. So press and hold it, release, and now the autopilot is in command, following the GPS. And let's now switch from indicated airspeed mode to high speed climb 182. There we go. Now you can see that the airplane will immediately lower the nose of the airplane till it is level. So the speed can increase, and then it will start climbing again while the airspeed indicator is moving up to the setting of the speed lock. Flaps are up. Speed is set, autopilot is in command, nav and climb is set. So let's run the after takeoff checklist, or the climb check. So fuel, gear is up, ice protection is set, auto carson off, external lights, taxi lights can be switched off now. Well, cabin size, this is a cargo plane, so that's not needed. Air conditioning is set, takeoff inhibit is out, cabin pressure is pressurized, prop sync is on, CTOT off, and altimeters were already standard, so no need to change that. Let's reset the altitude, and let's say that we are clear to climb to flight level 250, 25,000 feet. Let's increase the range on the nav display on the GPS. So the climb checks are now completed. As you can see, we are climbing, but a lot of the needles are in the red, and that's not where we want them. So what I will do now is reduce the condition levers until this is at approximately 1330 RPM. There we go. And I will reduce the power levers so until the temperature is back in the green again. Here we are, this is a nice setting. Perfect. Now we reached the first waypoint, so now we make a left turn. So nav mode, climb mode, you can select it when you see that the vertical speed starts to drop when the airplane gains altitude and you want to climb faster. You can press climb again, so it goes to medium speed. That will increase the rate of descent a bit, and by doing that you can basically climb till you reach your flight level, your cruise altitude. That's gonna take a while for us to reach, so I'm not gonna let the video run all the way through. I'll cut the video here, and I'm back with you guys as soon as we reach Ioannina, where I will switch from GPS to nav radio mode. So we have to set some frequencies, some courses, and use the selector knob to select the proper source of navigation for the autopilot. So see you guys in a bit. So I'm back a little bit sooner just to quickly demonstrate you the climb modes. As you can see, we're still in high speed climb, but the vertical speed is now coming down to 1000 feet per minute. If I want to increase that, I just press it again. Go to medium climb, speed 156, and you can see that the vertical speed will increase. First a lot because it has to lose speed, but once it reaches the bug, it will then go back and still maintain a climb speed well above 1000 feet per minute. So that's how you can use the climb speed in various phases of the climb. That's just a short thing that I wanted to demonstrate to you. So see you in a couple of minutes when we approach Ioannidis for the switch from GPS to VOR navigation. See you in a bit. So we will reach the next waypoint, Ioannina, in approximately 2.5 minutes. And from Ioannina we will have to fly to Larissa in Greece, which has a frequency of 109.00. So let's dial that one in here, 109.00. And we have to fly there on a course of 088. So let's dial that in here already. What I will do now is I press heading slave, go to heading select. No, we're going to do this differently. I will set that one on the right navigation radio. I press the second course and set that course to 088. Now it's not yet identified. So what I want to do right now is stay on this heading until I have reached the VOR. And as soon as I have reached the VOR, set the heading to 088 until I am within range of the next VOR. Or I can just leave it on GPS, but that's not that doesn't aid to the objective of this video, showing different autopilot modes. So 1 mile out, let's now switch this to heading select and set the heading also to 088. Set the source to VOR and set the right radio as the source. So now we just have to wait till we get a clue in here that the VOR is identified, and until that time we just fly on heading 088. But given the wind that comes in at 70 knots from the right, it's probably mean that we will be blown off course, because of course this is a heading bug, it's not a track bug. So I will set the heading slightly further to the right to compensate for that left headwind. So let's just get rid of this and let's just head slightly further than east. That might give us a track towards the next waypoint. Because heading is the direction the airplane is facing, and track is the direction the airplane is moving. And as soon as you have a crosswind, such as we have right now, 60 knots from the front right, it means that the wind will try to blow the airplane in this direction. So if I set my heading the same as my track, I will be blown off course. So to compensate for that wind, I will have to set a heading further right than my course, so I can get a heading of, for instance, 100 to fly a track of 088. And then as soon as we are in range again of the VOR, when it's identified, we'll switch back to nav again. And as soon as that happens, I will be back with you. So see you in a bit. So hello and welcome back. We are now 6 minutes, well, a little under that, prior to reaching Larissa VOR. And that is a good time to start talk you guys through the approach that we will fly into Skiathos. Like I said, we have now set the VOR on the left radio for the Skopelos VOR, and Skopelos is basically the last VOR before we fly the approach. And Skopelos is also the starting point of the approach that we will fly, because we will fly the NDB, VOR DME NDB approach into runway 2 for Skiathos. Meaning we will fly into Skopelos, and we have to be over Skopelos at 4,000 feet. Then we have to make a right turn heading 205 until we are 10 miles out of Skopelos. Then we'll make a right hand turn heading 010 towards runway 2 in Skiathos. Skiathos doesn't have an L.E.S, so we have to use the NDB, which is at frequency 326. And we basically have to use that one to guide us in, and the needle for the NDB has to be at approximately 010 when we come out of this turn. And at this point, Foxtrot November 02, we have to be at, well, approximately 1700 feet to start the descent into runway 2. So let's just take a quick look at the radios in flight deck. 326 is already dialed in for the ADFs, and this is the frequency for that Skiathos NDB, so that's set correctly. 113.4 for Skopelos was already set, and we want to be at Skopelos at 4,000 feet. Right now we are flying at 25,000 feet, so we have to descend 21,000 feet. You can use the 1 in 3 rule to determine the top of descent point, meaning the amount of feet that you have to descend, you can divide that by 1,000, so 21,000 feet to descend divided by 1,000 equals 21. You multiply the outcome by 3, so 21 times 3 is 63 miles out, and you can always make sure to start a little bit early in case you have to decelerate. But deceleration with this airplane isn't that much of an issue. The airplane flies pretty slow, so basically I will use 63 miles away from Skopelos to initiate our descent, which is pretty soon, as you can see here. Because we're now 69 miles out, so in approximately 6 miles we have to start our descent into Skopelos. To do that, I can now press the Alt-Hold and reduce the speed in here already to 4,000 feet. Now, as you can see, the plane is still in Alt-Hold mode in there, and I can just wind this down to 4,000. 67 miles, so 4 miles before we start our descent. When we start our descent, I will select indicated airspeed mode and close down the throttles, and we want to descend, well, let's say approximately 190. That's a nice position to set the bug for descending in here. We can also see that the Larissa VOR is coming up quite rapidly. The needle for scope loss is already moving in. And now I can release the drag on the power levers, because I will close them down quite soon. So let's just do that right now. And press the indicated airspeed mode. And now you can see, because the needle is below the buck, I can increase the buck a little bit. 180 knots. Airplane starts to descend to increase speed. And we can basically already make that right hand turn now to Skiathos, because we have almost intercepted the VOR. 4 miles to go. So let's take the descent checklist. The briefing is completed, ice protection was set, cabin pressure is checked, instrument and radios are set, and the bucks, they are set. Now, right now we have a nice straight arrow, so I will now switch over from the right source to the left to fly direct to Skiathos. Here we go. And since Skiathos is the last VOR that we will be using, I don't need the VOR2 anymore, so I can hide the second course on my nav display to prevent confusion in the approach phase of this flight. Now, like I said on the chart, when we approach Skiathos, or when we are over Skiathos, we have to fly a heading of 205. So I can already set my heading bug to 205 right now, so that when I am over Skiathos, all I have to do at that time is simply press heading. Then the airplane will follow that heading of 205. I think this is 204, so one tad. Here we are, 205. Basically, I'm now already set up for the approach into Skiathos. So what I can do also is already check if we have a meter for Skiathos. QNH is 1017. Wind 037, knots. So I can already dial in the QNH of 1017, because we are descending to 4,000 feet. And the transition altitude is 4,000 feet. So I can descend to 4,000 feet on a QNH of 1017. Or 3003. And while the airplane descends, I will cut the video here, and I'm back with you guys as soon as we are about to start the approach, when we approach Skiathos, and when we have to switch from the nav to the heading mode and fly the approach into Skiathos. So see you in a bit. So welcome back, here we are. 5 miles prior to Skiathos VOR, and we are now leveled at 4,000 feet. And like I mentioned before, it is important in this airplane to keep an eye on your engine power management, because now we have leveled off. I have not done anything about my engine power, and you can see that the speed is now dropping significantly. So it's always important to keep your engine power on top of your mind, because I want to increase my speed slightly to approximately 180 knots. So let's just keep it like this. 67 degrees is fine for now. The speed will rise slowly. And we are 2.5 miles away from Skiathos VOR right now. So this is the one I wanted. That's the airport. This is Skopelos. So we're going to make a right-hand turn heading 205. Then 10 miles out we'll make a right turn again and come in and land on the airport in that direction. 4,000 feet, 1 mile to go. Less than 1 mile, so let's switch now to the heading select, and that will have the airplane make a right-hand turn heading for 205, and we can descend 2,000 feet. So let's go back to indicated airspeed mode, close down the throttles to flight idle, have the speed bug at 180. And now the airplane will fly heading 205 and descend to 2,000 feet, just according to the approach plate, because 4,000 feet over the VOR, right turn heading 205, descend 2,000 feet 10 miles out, then a right hand turn slightly descending until we come out of that turn heading 010 at approximately 1,700 feet. Now, like I said, that's an NDB approach with the Skiathos 326. So what I can do now is click the bearing in here to visualize the magenta arrow again, and that arrow is now always pointing towards the Skiathos NDB. So wherever I fly, when I bring my airplane on a heading that is the same as the tip of the arrow, I will fly to Skiathos NDB. I want to fly to Skiathos NDB on a heading of 010. So right now we are 4 miles out of Skopelos, 2,500 feet. Let's dial in the decision height. Is that already possible? No, it's not. And now here we go again. So it's 2,000 feet coming up. So it's time to now increase the power on your thrust levers to maintain a current speed of approximately 180 knots. If you don't do that, speed will drop, you will stall, and at 2,000 feet that is a massive challenge to recover from that in time before you hit the water. What I also do right now on the throttle quadrant is set the condition levers back to max or max. So here we are, and let's run the approach checklist. So altimeters, let's verify that that's still accurate. 1017 it is, that's set and cross-checked. External lights on. Cabin signs, well, it's not needed, and the HP valves are on auto, as they should. We are now 9 miles out. And let's now prepare ourselves for that right-hand turn. Let's fly on heading 300 first for a little bit. Reset the altitude to 1,700 feet. Back to indicated airspeed hold mode. Slightly come down on the power levers to enable the airplane to descend slightly, whilst keeping speed. And I want to reduce my speed to 170 knots or 160, so I can set my first stage of flaps. Right now, 30, you can see that the needle is now at north. And once that is at 010, I will commence my turn. I can commence my turn already slightly, so I can be at the same heading once the NDB needle hits the 010. It's now on 005. And 010, there it is. So let's make a right-hand turn now, heading 010. Flaps 7. And this is where the airport is located. So we'll fly in on 010, and when we are slightly out of the airport, then we have to make a right-hand turn. What I will do now is disengage the autopilot, silence the alarm. Next stage of flaps, gear down. Auto Corson is on. CTOT is armed. And we are now descending into the aerodrome. So let's run the landing checklist already. Auto Corson is on, landing signal is given, gear down lock 3 green. Hydraulics are checked, prop sync, we have to switch that one off. It is. Condition levers are set to max. Flaps down. De-ice boots off, yaw damper is off. So landing checklist is completed. Let's set our missed approach altitude to 4,000 feet. Because when we are flying a missed approach, we have to go back to Scopolos at 4,000 feet to do the whole drill again. So we increase a little bit of thrust. And we have to move to the right, because we are way to the left of the runway now.
Approaching 02.
Check 02. Because that's the runway over there. So let's turn in for final. Rate of descent, not too fast, but it's a short runway, so you don't want to overshoot it completely. We're slightly low, but we will compensate that very shortly, so continue landing.
Four 4,000 feet remaining.
And here we are. Full reverse. Manual braking. On the runway. So let's just taxi off and vacate the runway. Enable nose wheel steering first. There we are. And that basically concludes our flight in this autopilot tutorial for the Saab 340. So we'll just vacate the runway here. Set this to ground idle again. Come to a complete stop. And let's take a look at that landing from the outside while I say my goodbyes to you, because, well, with this landing, there's not much more to tell about the autopilot system. So I hope this tutorial was useful to you, that you have actually learned something from it. Like I said, I used the manual, the systems manual from the A340 that is included in the package when you buy this airplane. So if there's anything that's not clear, you can read it back yourself. From page 192 onward is where the autopilot and flight director systems are explained. And let's just look how this landing looked like. Ooh, that was nice. That was one of the best landings in this airplane I've had so far. With slow down rollout. But anyway, like I said, page 192 onwards. And this is why it's such an immensely popular airport with spotters. There are only a couple of flights a day, but it's quite spectacular to see them arrive. So if you have any tips, tricks, questions, comments whatsoever, please leave them in the comment section below. As usual, please do so in a respectful manner. We are all here to learn. I'm not a professional pilot, so it's quite well possible that there are mistakes in here. If so, please mention them in the comment section so that everyone can learn from them, and also explain what I did wrong and how it should be done. That's basically it. Thanks for all the likes and subscribes. Hope you liked the video. Hope to see you next time on another video. So that's it for me, and on this final touchdown I say thank you for watching and bye bye. Oh, we did have a bump in there. Well, see you next time. Bye bye. And by the way, like I said, the Skiathos airport scenery I bought over at x-aviation.com. As you can see, it's a beautiful rendition of the entire Skiathos island with the village and of course the famous spotting area, the harbor. Everything is in place. It's quite a nice add-on. I can really recommend you to buy this one. It's also great fun to land here with an A320 or a 737 or even a 757. It's real challenging, short runway, so you really have to do your approach visual because there's no guidance system. And you have to, well, if you touch down too far, you have to make a go around because the runway just simply isn't long enough to land. So quite challenging, lovely scenery, lovely rendition of this very nice airport. So those are the real final words. See you next time. Bye bye.